Hello, my name is Champ Clark. I am the CTO here at Quadrant Information Security. This is our development roadmap for the year 2023. We are mid-cycle all the way through. So the idea here is to give our clients and interested parties updates on what we are doing from a technology standpoint at Quadrant Information Security. This is our at a glance of our quadrant roadmap. As you can see, we have things that started out in Q4 of 2022 up to the end of Q4 of 2023. We are in the middle of the cycle, so some of this stuff has already been completed. Some stuff is already currently in the works. And we'll get into more details on each one of them. To start out with was the Rapid7 Insight VM or vulnerability management system integration. What this allows our SOC to do is reach into our clients' vulnerability management systems and pull out data related to assets that might be being attacked. The idea here is that when we get an alert that comes in, the SOC analyst gets a lot of information around the alert, the criticality of the type of event, things like that. But we also pass on some fingerprinting information, for instance, like what operating system and what services might be running on that particular device. But if we can reach into a client's Rapid7 Insight VM, we can pull vulnerability data out of that as well. And then the SOC analyst can look at that and say, is this machine, vulnerable to this type of attack, or does it even line up? What this allows us to do is make better decisions around alerts. It also allows us to filter out things that we don't think are necessarily useful to alerting on. So to better balance that signal to noise ratio. As it says here, this was scheduled to be completed in Q4 of 2022. For the most part, that did happen. The code was completed, and early Q1 in January or so, we actually started doing testing and whatnot. This has been completed, so if there's anybody who's interested in this particular functionality, we would love to talk to you about it. One thing that we've also been concentrating on over about the last couple of years is endpoint integration. We started out with things like Microsoft Defender and SentinelOne's EDR, which have been completed and we do support. And then we have moved on to things like CrowdStrike and CarbonBlack. To be clear on this, when we talk about integration, we've always been able to receive logs from these platforms. And receiving data is not the problem. It's more of the interaction with the EDR system. That is our SOC's ability to use the client's EDR to put machines into a quarantine state. We get data from lots of different endpoints. So for instance, not just endpoints, but actually from log analysis and firewalls and the cloud, for instance, Office 365, stuff like that. And while most EDRs are really, really good at what they do at blocking different types of attacks, there are some situations where we might want to pivot to a endpoint and put a machine in quarantine or analyze what's going on a little bit closer. And for instance, we were involved with an attack with a ransomware gang, and they were using FTP to exfiltrate data out of the network. FTP by itself is not really a malicious protocol by itself, but the protocol is being abused to the point to exfiltrate the client's data out of the network. From an EDR standpoint, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to stop that FTP traffic because it by itself is not necessarily malicious. However, through packet analysis and other types of analysis, we were able to determine that it looks like an exfiltration attempt. So the idea here would be to then be able to switch over and then put that endpoint into a quarantine state, basically hit the big pause button so that we can look deeper into it. So while EDR tools like CrowdStrike and CarbonBlack and all these do excellent jobs at stopping certain types of attacks, there are times you want to be able to pivot over to a EDR system and put a pause on the machine, not necessarily because directly being attacked, but maybe it's doing something a little bit fishy, for instance, exfiltration or some low-level stuff that you want to look at a little bit more closer into. These integrations, as I said, we've done Microsoft Defender for quite some time now and SentinelOne for quite some time. We have finished up the CarbonBlack integration. So that has been completed as of Q1 of 2023. And we have just finished up the Crowdstrike integration. That was probably about a few weeks ago that we have that completed. So that was a little bit over schedule, but it has been completed as well. If you use any of these particular endpoints, we would love to talk to you about it, because our Security Operations Center that can make decisions to quarantine things at 3 a.m. and put a pause on different types of attacks, which is really, really useful. I would like to point out that we also do this at a network level as well, and we have done this for many years. It's kind of an IPS type of functionality. So we can integrate with things like FortiGate firewalls. And when we see a specific type of attack, we can send a block request to your FortiGate firewall to stop that. So that the idea here is so that we can stop it and then understand exactly what's going on before any kind of attack gets out of control. On the IPS level, that happens at both. It can happen at both an automated level or a manual level. So if you're interested in doing it at a data center level, please let us know there as well, because we can also do that. One thing that we're also very, very excited about is the Quadrant Endpoint. We've been working on this for almost 2 years now, and our philosophy is that while there are great products like Crowdstrike and CarbonBlack and Microsoft Defender, things of that nature, these are really, really hard or heavy to manage for small teams. And Endpoint becomes, as great of a tool as it is, becomes yet another tool that has to be managed and maintained. What we've seen in small businesses and even some small, medium-sized businesses is the staff involved doesn't really have the time to get fully vested into an endpoint product. There might be reasons for cost. There might be, and whenever I speak of cost, I'm not talking about just buying the project or buying the software. It's also about rolling it out, the engineering, the network time, or network dev or network teams time, things of that nature. So the idea here is to help out our clients who don't necessarily have the size or maybe the manpower or woman power to push out this type of technology, that we can help them with something. So what we coined this as is Endpoint as a Service. That is, it is 100% fully managed. And it's also, since we have been developing it, we can integrate it to our SOC Operations Center way more tightly than we can, say, with CrowdStrike. While we get a lot of good information from the CrowdStrikes and Microsoft Defenders of the world, we can actually get a lot more with our own endpoints. So that is kind of the concept there. If you don't already have an endpoint solution, or you want to try to beta our current endpoint solution, we are open to that. We are looking for people to help us beta that particular endpoint solution. We've just started wrapping this up for Q3 for a beta. We had hoped to have it done in Q2, so as you can see, we're a little bit behind on that. But these are very large projects and take a lot of work. Right now, what we are betaing is the Windows and Linux versions of the Quadrant Endpoint. The Mac OS versions will be out probably at Q1 of next year. So if you have any questions about that, please feel free to call us. Network data points is something that we are excited about. The reason is that a lot of times whenever we have an attack that is taking place, there are not attack that's taking place. If we want to see if an attack is taking place, we look for indicators of compromise, or IOCs. The issue is most of these IOCs go into something like an Elasticsearch or OpenSearch backend. And what happens is you're stuffing terabytes of data into a database, and you're trying to scrape it looking for very specific types of data. So for instance, IP addresses, file hashes, stuff like that. The concepts of network data points is that we take data as we're getting, as it's being streamed to us, and then we identify it ahead of time. So for instance, IP addresses or file hashes or JA3 hashes, things of that nature. And then we take that data and then we store it into a database. But rather than storing all that particular data around that particular event, we store the times that it was first seen and the times that it was last seen. The idea here is that in most cases, whenever one of our clients comes to us and they say they're interested in finding out if, for instance, a IP address that was seen in the FBI flash report has been seen in their network, the question is usually, have you seen this IP address in my network? It should be a simple or very quick yes or no kind of question. So using network data points, we can actually go through and say, yes, it has, we have seen it, and this is the time that we've seen it. And then you can pivot over to the bigger sets of data. So for instance, if we see an IP address and it was found in February of 2023, then we know a starting point to start looking through data, be it in our Elastic data set or in cold storage or wherever that it is. And we don't have to search all through the bigger data sets looking for that one thing. However, if we haven't seen it, we should know that fairly immediately. If we go to search for it and we say, have you ever seen this IP address from this FBI flash report? The system should be able to come back and say, no, I haven't. Then we know we don't need to search any more data sets and we can do a complete stop there. So it acts as a kind of a pivot point for you to find out, have we seen this? I did a talk in Athens, Greece at SuriCon in 2022 about this. And that link will be available at the bottom of this presentation. We had expected more development and is scheduled for Q2. We are behind on this, so we are rapidly working on this. We picture this probably happening more in Q4. The concepts of how to get the data and where to store it have already been done. There's some UI development that needs to be done, and some stuff's kind of cleaned up about the implementation process. But we are getting there, so feel free, if you want to get into the technical details of it, you can watch my SuriCon talk from 2022. It goes pretty deep into the technical details. Another thing that we're excited about is having Sagan, our log analysis engine, be able to query Active Directory. And it's not just Sagan, the log analysis engine, it's also our SOC, the ability to query your Active Directory. When we're investigating a possible attack, there's a lot of information that is in Active Directory that could really, really assist our analysts and even from our signature writing level. So for instance, if we see something that looks like might be a brute force attack, being able to query Active Directory and see if the user has recently changed their password is really, really valuable to us. Here goes the reason why. If we have a user that changes their password and then we start seeing brute force attacks, it's probably an automated process of the users that's attempting to log in, and it's actually probably not a brute force attack. Other information we can get from as well is geolocation of specific clients, or specific users, if that data is available to us. So if we see a login come from a geolocation that looks kind of suspicious, we can cross-reference Active Directory and pull out that information and see, do they work in this particular office or is it close by? So that we can look at things like impossible travel, but actually at an Active Directory kind of level. This also means that if we can pull directly out of Active Directory and do basically, so we're doing log analysis, and then we're making some determinations from log analysis and the Sagan log analysis engine, and then we're pivoting into Active Directory to get more answers around this particular event. We feel that we can make this so that it is a lot less alerts that are happening. This means a better signal to noise ratio. Again, going back to things like GeoIP or brute forces that are classified as brute forces by the system, but then we realize a password change has recently taken place. This can really help out that signal to noise ratio. We also want the ability for our SOC analysts to be able to do things like disable an account. So for instance, if we see something fishy happening, let's say for instance, a guest user logs into Active Directory, our analysts or our software backend have the ability to say, hey, that's really, really suspicious. Let's disable that account. And we'll disable it so that we can put a pause in that type of attack. So that is the concept there. The completion was supposed to be for Q3. It's looking more like Q4. We have this out in testing, but again, there's more development that needs to be done around this. If you guys have any questions about this, please feel free to contact us. As always, we have lots of stuff going on in development in 2023. We've been redesigning our SOC console and our SOC backend. We are using more and more cloud resources every day. So we're trying to shift some things around there. Now, from your standpoint, there's a lot of this stuff that probably isn't very exciting. It's exciting to us internally because we're getting rid of some legacy data formats and putting them into more exciting, more modern data formats that we can use and cross-reference. But what it also does is allows the customer console, your experience, to be faster so that you can get to data faster and things like that. We also released our version 2 of the Quadrant API. The Quadrant API allows you to reach into our backend and grab all the data around alerts and different types of events that have happened. So from that standpoint, you can reach into our cloud, find out between date ranges, when certain types of alerts happen, what their criticality was, how a SOC analyst handled it, what the time frames were, the signature itself that triggered the event, all kinds of valuable information. What we've seen customers use this in our version 1 and now V2 are in SOAR platforms. So they use this as one of their data tools to pull in the data and then try to correlate within their SOAR. So that's one use case. We have other people who are using it for more statistical analysis and things like that. But that is out there. That is in your Quadrant console. If you go up into the top left corner into the little gear and click on that, you'll see Quadrant API. If you click on the Quadrant API, there's documentation under there, and there's also where you can set up your API key. You just say generate key and it'll generate it for you, and some documentation to get you started on your way. A lot of our clients are using things like Python to write connectors and stuff like that. We'll be more than happy to help you on that. We are always continuing to develop more and more for cloud APIs. So for instance, we have a ton of different APIs that we integrate with, everything from your Cisco umbrellas to Office 365 to things like China Cache and more obscure ones that maybe you didn't even know that we have integrations into. We have a lot of different integrations too. So if you have things like Netscope in your environment and you want us to be able to pull that data into our backend so our SOC can do more analytics on it and look for threats in it, let us know. If there's an API that we don't have, still, please talk to us because we'll put it on our dev roadmap. One thing what we're also working on right now is through technical writers to get more documentation around the APIs that we currently support out there so that you can kind of browse the list. Because many times what happens is one of our clients, they'll browse the list and say, oh, I didn't know you did that. We also need that as well. So it just gives you kind of an update. So we're hoping fairly soon, probably the beginning of 2024, maybe Q4 2023, to be able to have more technical data out there about our API integrations. Of course, we're still working on research and development for a Microsoft R&D. So we're continually working on that. We're excited about that one. Many customers seem to be interested in that as well. And as also always, we are always listening to our customers to find out what integrations, what ideas that you have. So for instance, as I said, we do Rapid7 integration, which Insight VM Rapid7 integration. If you don't use Rapid7, that probably doesn't help you a whole lot. But by you telling us what type of vulnerability management tools or APIs that you're currently using, it drives our roadmap. Every time we hear a customer say something, we have to listen to it and then decide on how we're going to address it. Is this something that, where we should put it within our roadmap? So for the most part, this is the end of this particular section of the development roadmap. Our next one will be in February of 2024. Again, we're going to do this in about 6-month stints. Obviously, we're thinking about what our 2024 dev roadmap is going to look like, and we'll have more information there. And then mid-year, we'll be doing more updates to it. The last thing that I'm going to do, this kind of goes into the weeds of how Sagan works, but if you've gotten enough out of this, you can feel free to stop watching now, because what I'm going to talk about is the open source side of Sagan. If you didn't know, Sagan has an open source component to it. It is available on GitHub, and you can go out there and browse the source code and look at our rule sets and all kinds of information like that. This gives some of the internal updates that we've been doing on the Sagan log analysis engine. So this is probably pertains more to the people who like to get really into the weeds of things. So one thing right off is the internal message buffer size. We've added an option in for that. It was originally 32 kilobytes. Now we can make it a lot bigger whenever we want to. This makes it really good for handling JSON objects. Sagan has a lot of JSON rule keywords that you can use, but sometimes JSON can be a lot larger than your average log file coming from, say, a Cisco ASA or something like that. The downside of that is whenever you increase the size of it, the buffer gets increased, the CPU usage also goes up as well. That's because you're moving more of the data around in memory, which just requires more and more CPU. We've also added in a couple of new command line options, the file option, which allows you to read files from disk. So we use this a lot, for instance, if we want to go back and analyze logs and see if there was an IP address or there's some TTP or IOC that we want to go back and go through a bunch of cold storage. We can use the file option to load up a rule set and say, hey, grab these 50 files in this directory and analyze them using this latest rule set. That just allows us to rapidly go through that kind of data. Some of the other options are things like rules and threads, so you can define the number of threads that you want to use from the command line, and things like testing. So the -test option just means go through your startup routine, but right when you get to the part where you're going to fire up the Sagan engine, you can stop there as well. It also does support file globbing, so you can say like, I want you to analyze all these files, 2023 star.star or something like that. So you can glob the files together. It also fixed some legacy issues where there are some issues when you use old file support where threading, there was a race condition that would happen, and threading would be an issue because it was threaded. You had two different threads that are working on different things, which would cause things like X bits and X bits and flex bits to be out of sync. We've added, more support for the external output format. The external output format used to use a custom JSON format, which we absolutely hated. We've now used the standardized E format. We've made some significant grounds on CPU gains, that is, getting more out of the CPU. As you know, the Sagan is written in C. It uses P threads. It's a really high performance engine. We always try to squeeze as much as we can out of it. And the same thing goes for memory gains, which is actually slightly farther down, but I'll go ahead and mention it now. We made it a little bit lighter on memory and more so that it doesn't use quite as much as it used to. These are kind of constant things that we're constantly working on, trying to basically get more out of the CPU as we can, and also make it as memory friendly as possible. Our thing is like, we understand that CPU and memory is dirt cheap nowadays, but when you're doing it at scale, it can actually cost quite a bit of money. So if you're doing this in the cloud and you're analyzing 20,000 servers who are sending you logs, those little changes can make a big difference into costs. We've added a new pass signature type. Right now you have alert and drop. Pass is a type of event that when the rule criteria is met, all engine processing stops. So that is traditionally, if you have an alert, you'll fire off the alert, and then the engine continues parsing through the rest of the signature set. And the idea here is on a pass is that whenever a signature is hit, you can tell it to fire off an alert on it, but you don't need to go any further. This allows you to save CPU time, and also allows you some interesting things whenever you're trying to logically order signatures together. We've also added a lot of new JSON options. So for instance, JSON decode base64. So the idea here is that imagine you have a JSON key that has base64 in it. Sagan will decode it, and then you can apply things like PCRE or content to that particular piece of JSON, piece of base64. We do better signature validation, and we've obviously fixed a lot of bugs. Right now, we are scheduled to release Sagan 2.1.0, which I think will probably be released in the next few weeks. We're tidying up some stuff. I'd hope to have a release sooner, but we've gotten a little bit busy, and we want to make sure that we get it out and get it right so that we don't cause problems. Anyways, that is our rundown for our 2023 mid-year development cycle. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to our team. You can reach out to me directly. My email address is cclark@quadrantsec.com. You can also contact info@quadrantsec.com if you have any questions about anything that you've seen in this presentation. And keep in mind, we plan on doing this in February as well. So we're going to be updating you on the new things that we're going to be working on in our 2024 cycle, and then giving you updates on that as well. Thank you very much, and have a great day.